Lawyers of Reddit, what is a detail that your client failed to bring up to you that completely lost you the case? Part 2, there's so many. My dude in a custody battle where the opposing party claims he has a drinking problem and he denies it 1000%. Even after the real talk I have with him asking him to not hide shit from me and to be honest, we go into court and at cross-examination the opposing party provides video evidence of him finishing work, driving to an abandoned parking lot to drink a few tall boys and then going to pick up his kid from school. Every single access visit. He not only didn't tell me that, he forgot to mention that his ex's brother owns a private investigator firm. Fooing idiot, didn't lose the case but caused the judge to lose his shit and for the whole pre-trial to be tossed and restarted from scratch. Was in the jury pool waiting for the jury to be picked when we had a fire alarm go off and we all went outside. Apparently one of the jurors talked to the defendant accidentally because of confusion on leaving the building. Came back next day and started the whole process over again when suddenly a sidebar is called. Turns out the defendant mentioned to his lawyer the guy who was added to the jury at that point was the one he talked to outside during the fire alarm. Judge flips his shit on both the fact the juror talked to the defendant during the mess, and that they didn't just dismiss us outright the day when the fire alarm happened since we had not actually started picking anyone due to the fire alarm. After ranting and raving and watching buckets of spit leave the judge's mouth and hit both lawyers, he comes back, calmly apologizes to all of us and tells us we are dismissed. Outside of that, one of the times I was on the pool I watched a defendant realize how fooing real it now was and change his plea during jury selection. That also pissed the judge off to no end. I had a client who, despite being a large man, had been domestically abused by his much smaller wife throughout their marriage. After the divorce, she turned her anger on their son. He ran away one day to live with his dad and we filed to restrict her parenting time and for a permanent modification. At the permanent hearing she denied being abusive to the child or my client in front of the child, said she never threatened anyone ever, and that she never made disparaging remarks about my client in front of their son. What she didn't know, and therefore hadn't told her attorney, is that he had recorded multiple instances of her abuse. So I called my client back up for rebuttal and played an audio recording of her screaming at my client, threatening to break his face in, and calling him a loser, all while the child could be heard in the background begging her to stop. I looked over at the other attorney and she had her face in her hands. We won. A postcard. While I was in law school, I worked in a state AG office, Administrative Appeals Division. Guy was appealing a huge tax bill for unpaid tax on his dairy farm's milk production. His entire defense and claimed basis for appeal was that he had zero notice of the requirements to report production, sale and proceeds. In initial disclosures, file of discovery, was a postcard from the state tax office from when he initially registered to obtain a state tax number. Very smart tag laid low, sprung it on the guy after he has cemented his position 50 ways to Sunday. Exploded his whole theory, resulting in big judgment. Moral: read your own discovery responses and document production before building your entire theory of the case. One piece of paper can kill your client's position. This lesson has saved my bacon in 27 years of practice for sure. I was in a car accident when I was 18, it was my fault but there was very minimal damage to the lady's car and no one was injured other than whiplash. So I was really confused when I got a summons for a disposition almost a year later. She was suing me for $40,000 because the accident had her migraines and hurt her shoulder badly enough that she couldn't pick up her disabled son anymore. Both things she'd gotten referrals and had seen a specialist 6 months before the accident. Immediately closed. Lawyer: why didn't you tell me about this? Client: I didn't think it was relevant. Lawyer: you pay me to decide what's relevant. My house was robbed. In addition to all the stuff the thief took, he also stole a bunch of my suits and all of my neckties. I had a big collection, like 100 or so. However, the thief left fingerprints on a hard plastic box that I kept spare change in. Fast forward 3 months, The thief is caught in the act of robbing another house in the same neighborhood, same detectives on my case and this new theft. They fingerprint the guy and the fingerprints match the ones from my house. At the thief's arraignment, I see him strolling wearing my suit and my tie. I tell the district attorney, he says there's really no way to prove it. However, the tie he chose to wear was a one-of-kind street map of San Francisco and I still had all the documentation to prove it. The district attorney's eyes widen and he informs the judge. The judge has the thief placed under arrest again for possession of stolen property. The thief's lawyer was dumbfounded. It was a nice end to a rough situation. When I was a law student, I interned for a judge. One of the cases we were observing was an illegal lockout case, where this owner of a franchise location for an international cafe company claimed the landlord, owner of the right to issue franchises in the U.S., happened to be same guy, just one day locked him, franchise owner, out. Landlord had claimed the franchise owner was selling unapproved merchandise with the company's logo on it. For 2 days all we're hearing is about these cups the plaintiff allegedly made. Argument was that counterfeit merch violated terms of franchise and lease, which meant terminating both. Finally, the landlord is on the stand. The defense attorney pulls out a shopping bag as he's about to introduce evidence. Me and the other interns are so excited. For 2 days we've been hearing about these fooing cups, and the landlord suddenly can't remember where he got the cups from. In response to one question he says he got them at the cafe, in another he says the corporate office gave it to him. Since he raised doubt about the source of the cups, the judge wouldn't let them in, and we never got to see them. The defense attorney had to sadly put the bag away back into his briefcase. So yeah, lesson learned. Prepare your fooing witnesses, especially when you're trying to introduce critical evidence. Not a lawyer. My parents had a long messy divorce that took 2.5 years in court. My dad claimed that my mother was trying to take 100% of everything based on a settlement offer she sent him. He failed to mention to his lawyers that her initial offer, also sent to his previous lawyers, was a 60-40 split and she only sent that 100% one in response to an equally unreasonable offer from him. As soon as she could prove the initial offer was reasonable, the judge just basically ruled on everything according to that first offer. His lawyers were so angry because they built their entire case around the idea that she was the unreasonable one. I think it was something to do with arguing that she was not sending genuine settlement offers. I'm not sure why. His goal wasn't to win, it was to prolong the battle. But the original offer exposed him in the lie in front of the judge, which made the rest of the process go very quickly. Employment case. We got to the deposition of my client and all set up. The first question is, please state your name. The client looks at me and says, can we take a break? We do, and she pulls me out in the hall to tell me she's lying to me about her identity. She's apparently a serial fraudster and has changed identities 7 times since the 90s. She apparently thought the other attorneys had somehow figured it out, and that's why they asked the question. Something opposite but worth telling. Years ago, I assisted an attorney whose client was caught in a drug sting operation. After meticulous review of the discovery info received, the officer who typed the arrest report failed to include that defendant who was charged with possession of controlled substance ever had possession of controlled substance. Guy was out that same day for time already served. INL. And it's not even my stories but my dad's. He was working as a fraud investigator for an insurance company. I have a few stories of his, but here's 2 of them. Guy was claiming theft of multiple items but mainly a ring. Things weren't adding up, so my dad and the insurance company's lawyer decided to do a depot of him. Guy shows up and is doing the depot when my dad notices the guy is wearing the exact ring he's claiming was stolen. My dad slides a note to the lawyer telling him the guy's wearing the ring. Once the note got slid, the guy realized what happened and put his hands under the table and took the ring off. They asked him to stand up, and lo and behold, the ring fell to the ground. Another one is a guy claiming a break-in and theft. Immediately things weren't adding up as the window was broken out instead of in. The guy submitted Polaroids of items he claimed were his, like TVs and such. Thing is, in the Polaroids you could see the reflection of the store they were in on the glass. He also claimed numerous CD'(s/records, but oddly enough every single one started with an R, S, or a T. We're talking hundreds of CD'(s/records. My dad was about to deny the claim in person but noticed he had a gun on the table, so decided to do it over the phone. Ready for an escalation? Later this same guy was arrested for beheading a prostitute and throwing her head in the river. My parents spent most of my childhood, and were still arguing it years after I'd left home, tbh, embroiled in a messy divorce. One of their biggest arguments was about my parentage. My mom claimed that my dad claimed that I wasn't his child, and refused to engage with him until he admitted he was wrong. My dad refused to admit he was wrong and refused to engage with my mom until she apologized. Much later, I found out that those years spent arguing were all down to a typo on a court document which had my date of birth wrong by 10 years, thus having me being born after my dad had a vasectomy. Neither had mentioned the obvious typo to their legal representation, as I guess they thought fighting pointless battles in court for 5+ years was preferable to simply amending one number on a paper document. As an aside, one parent in particular went through multiple solicitors, barristers, insistent that each one had mismanaged the case, and to this day is still convinced that they were a model client who just had bad luck choosing representation. Had a work comp case where a client claimed he fell off the side of his truck while putting a tarp over the load and hurt his back. It seemed legit as he was taken to a hospital and they had given him meds. As we were pursuing the case, it turns out the company had a surveillance camera. The injury seemed fishy to the employer, so they looked at the recording. It turns out the idiot had climbed off the side of the truck, then laid down on the ground and started yelling for help. He had made the whole thing up. No wonder employers question work comp injuries. This guy ruined it for the legitimate claims. Not a lawyer yet, but I clerked for a DA's office throughout law school. Obviously we don't have clients, but I'll never forget this kidnapping case I worked on. It involved two Asian male defendants who were both the same age and looked relatively similar. Witness is on the stand and is asked to identify where the defendant who pushed a Uzi into his face is seated. It's clear the witness is having trouble differentiating the defendants. In a true moment of brilliance, one defendant raises his FUING hand and basically points to himself like, "Right here, bud." Hands down the dumbest shit I'd ever seen. I thought his defense attorney was going to have a brain aneurysm. Unfair dismissal case. My client claimed to have been unfairly dismissed from her accounting job due to poor performance. Her story was that they were just racist bullies. It turns out that she was running her own private accounting business, with her own clients, at her employer's premises during working hours, using their facilities. Her argument, when confronted with this fact, was that her clients would never have given her employer their business anyway. I actually did get her a small settlement because they didn't follow proper procedure when firing her, which is why I didn't know about the real reason for firing her, but it was peanuts compared to what she would have deserved if her story wasn't bullshit. Typically there should be warnings and appropriate sanctions and a termination with cause. There's quite a lot of leeway depending on the employment contract, whether it's unionized and jurisdiction. Usually direct competition is grounds for termination, but the employee should still be investigated and given the right to explain, respond to evidence, etc. outside the U.S., which I'm assuming is your jurisdiction. Other common law countries are more employee-friendly and more procedural fairness in employment settings would be expected. Not mine, but a client forgot to mention to her lawyer that the reason for the divorce was because she was recording all her foo sessions with her lover and sent it to her husband while said husband was attending her mother's funeral. Addendum. Just got back from an errand and was shocked by the amount of replies and questions. First up, adultery is considered a crime. The husband came to the funeral from another state while his wife was supposed to be there. He didn't find her. The video was sent to the husband because in the mind of the wife, if she humiliates him he'll be so emasculated he'll let her have everything if they divorced. Also, she didn't just send it to him, she sent to his friends and family and some of her friends' family. It was thought she was either on drugs or just very vindictive. Her lawyer wasn't happy when he found out about the videos, he just thought it was a normal divorce. Ha! I have a story for this. I was in trial for domestic violence charges from my wife now ex, where she claimed I had thrown white paint on my own car and proceeded to beat her up. What really happened was that we were arguing, she was destroying my things and throwing them out the window. I told her I was done and so she decided to throw rocks at my car, tried to pick up a rock the size of my head to smash through the windshield, and when that proved too heavy she grabbed a 1-gallon paint can to throw at my car. As she tried to throw the paint can at my car, I stopped her and tossed the can aside, at which point, she tried to attack me with an ice scraper. At this point I restrained her and sat on top of her until she calmed down. She did. I let her go. She ran to the busted open paint can, scooped up paint with her hands and threw it at my car. She then went back in the house. I went to the front door to ask for my things so I can get the hell out of there. She tried to kick me in the balls but I caught her foot and held it, telling her to fucking chill. She tugged to get her foot back and ended up hitting her foot on the door frame which caused a slight cut and bruise. Well, I left and she called the cops saying I was beating her up and such. We go to trial, I defend myself, and she tells her story of the battered wife. That I was beating her up, threw paint at my own car and that I slammed her foot in the door frame. At the trial, my lawyer pulls out the pictures of my black car covered in white paint and asks if I really threw paint at my own car. She of course says yes, but then my lawyer pulled out pictures the police station took of her to document her injuries. They were front and side views of her but you can tell her hands were covered in white paint like gloves. Plus, it came out that she was cheating, which was the original reason we were arguing in the first place. The jury acquitted me and it was funny that I met the jury foreperson in the elevator as I was leaving the courthouse. She told me, "We decided to let you go because you need a divorce." I'm late to this, but I'll share mine anyway. TL, Doctor, client forged the bank statements that her entire wrongful foreclosure case was based on. We had clients who said the bank wrongly foreclosed on their house. The wife provided bank statements, their checking account was in a different bank than their mortgage, showing that they had made their payments every single month for the past several years. I checked through each one to make sure they all showed payments and looked good. There was also proof that the notice of foreclosure was never actually delivered to them. The bank was baffled. Expert witnesses we talked with confirmed that during the recession, a lot of banks' record-keeping had gone to shit, and a wrongful foreclosure could definitely result from that. We got to mediation, and the first thing the bank comes back with was that upon close examination, they had noticed one tiny error on the bank statements, so they were calling off mediation and subpoenaing statements from the bank itself to check against our clients' statements. Our clients were pissed, and so were we. So what if the bank had made a tiny error? The opposing side got the subpoenaed statements a couple weeks later and sent them to us, and I had the joy of comparing them. I quickly noticed that there were differences between the ones from our clients and the subpoenaed ones in the electronic withdrawals section. Our client had used a PDF editor to delete an entry in that section on every statement, add the mortgage payment, and then adjust the totals, carrying them over each month. We approached our clients about it, and we said these look forged. We can drop the case or you can explain what the issue is. The wife said we should probably drop the case. She never confessed to us about forging them, but without a doubt, she had forged them. Her husband had no idea. He actually wasn't on the call where we accused her of the forgery, and he called a few weeks later asking for a case update. That was not fun, telling him his wife had lied to him for the last year and a half. The opposing side said they'd be okay with us dropping the case as long as our clients paid their attorney fees. Our clients were happy to do that. It's actually very lucky the defendant bank didn't try to get them charged criminally. Check out our other videos and subscribe and leave your suggestions and experiences in the comments below. Have a great day.